Welcome to the Glenbard Parents Series, the first program of the new year. We're very happy that you could be with us tonight. I know you'll come away with some important information. The format this evening will be such that we will first hear from Matt Pietrafetta, then there will be conversation with Patrick McGill, and then we will welcome Jeff Selingo about 7:45. We'll have some questions prior to Jeff Selingo's talk. You can enter them in the chat. I want to tell you briefly about what's coming up in this month of January. It's a very, very packed program that we have organized for this month. So next week, we have Phyllis Fagel, who will be speaking about her book, Middle School Matters, 10 Key Skills Kids Need to Thrive. She'll be speaking at 7 p.m. and then at noon, we have a workshop for professionals. So let your schools know that they're all the social workers, psychologists, school counselors are welcome to join in, or professionals who are outside of the schools are also welcome to join us. 2 weeks later, Dr. John Duffy will talk about his book, Parenting the New Teen in the Age of Anxiety. This too will be followed by a noon presentation for staff, understanding a student's stressed, depressed, and amazing adolescence. And we did just add a program that will take place on January 21st on rail safety. We have a distinguished panel of experts who will be talking about rail safety, including Lanny Wilson, MD, and we also are welcoming Jason Washburn, who is a psychologist at Northwestern Medicine and Lurie Children's Hospital. So there'll be a lot of important information that night. And I do want to mention a program coming up in February. On February 4th, we are welcoming on his book tour, Ron Lieber. Ron Lieber is a financial reporter for the New York Times, and he will be talking about his book that came out, or I think it's coming out next week, if I'm not mistaken. And the title of the book is The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. You can find information about all of these programs on the website, glenbardgps.org. And on that website, you can also find recordings of past presentations. This program will also is being recorded, and you'll look for Matt's page as a past program, and you can find the recording there. This is a return visit with Matt Pietrafetta, who's the founder of Academic Approach, and he's going to be introduced tonight by Patrick McGill. He is the Director for Teaching and Learning Curriculum and Pathways for the Glenbard Schools. I'm going to briefly mention Jeff Selingo so that when he is able to join us, we'll go right into it. Jeff is the author of 3 books, College Unbound, There is Life After College, Inner Workings of Colleges and Universities, and in his latest book, which came out in September of 2020, Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admissions. Then returning with us next fall, Jeff will be back for an extended period of time, but we'll get a little glimpse into the school and hopefully get into that book and hopefully get some of your questions answered. Again, make use of the chat. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McGill. Take it away, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Gilda. Good evening, everyone. I'm really honored here to be here with Matthew again to talk about this really important topic. On a personal note, I have experienced the great work of Academic Approach first as a teacher when I heard them talk about really thinking differently about tests and how they actually assess students' ability to navigate and really navigate and answer questions that are complex, that are multifaceted and nuanced. And I learned that as a teacher, and then I've had an opportunity to work and see the good work of Academic Approach as a principal, and now from the district office lens. And I feel really blessed and fortunate to have their partnership at the Glenbard High Schools to offer our free SAT prep that we're in the 2nd year of now. Not only is it robust and it's strong and it's great for our students, and we offer it for all of our students for free, but Academic Approach is being nimble and flexible like all of us, and they've mastered Zoom, and we're really excited to see what that looks like this spring. So I'm really excited for the presentation. I know it's going to be good stuff. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to Matthew. Thank you for joining us.
Dr. McGill, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you, families, for having me with you here tonight. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up if you see it. Great. Thank you so much. Well, tonight, I'll present for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to some question and answer after that. I'm going to be working from a document that's accessible to you all if you go to academicapproach.com online learning resources. There's a document you can download called Understanding College Entrance Exams, a Personalized Approach. It's a long document. I'm going to highlight just a few pieces from it tonight. But if you do want to download it later and peruse it, you're welcome to. I'll close with a slide that gives this URL again. It's academicapproach.com online learning resources. What I'll touch on tonight is a little bit of a comparison and contrast between the ACT and SAT. What I'd like to provide you with is some context, some understanding of these tests and the impact that the differences between them can have on a student's experience, a student's testing experience. So as parents, as families, you can have meaningful conversations about what's on one test or the other test, how your child might react to it. You can become a little bit more proficient at interpreting the results when they come back and having constructive, supportive conversations with your children about those results. I'll also focus, as Dr. McGill was mentioning, on the learning opportunity. We're called Academic Approach for a reason. I'll talk a little bit at the very end about how I founded the company and briefly on its philosophy, but in the end, it is about taking an academic approach to test preparation, seeing the instructional opportunities, seeing how you can learn skills that are both useful in the classroom and on the test for college and in career. So I'll talk about learning opportunity. A couple notes on taking a healthy approach, a little bit about us, and then our partnership with the district, and then leave some time for question answer. So at a high level, what I'd like you to be able to do is kind of move in with me through a bit of a funnel down into the major differences and the minor differences between the ACT and the SAT, so you can understand both exams and how your students might react to them. On page 10 of the document that you can download on our website, you can look at references detail later. But at the highest level, if you want to compare ACT and SAT, they do look pretty similar. Each of them has, ACT has an English section that it starts with, which tests grammar. The second section of the SAT is something called a writing section. It tests grammar. They each have reading. SAT calls it evidence-based reading. ACT calls it reading. They each have math. At that highest level, the most conspicuous difference is the science section you'll notice on the ACT. SAT does not have one. How can this be meaningful? Well, if it's a preferred topic for a student, they may enjoy that section. If science is non-preferred, they may not, and may therefore prefer the SAT, which doesn't have a science section. By and large, both of them about 3-hour exams. They each have an optional essay at the end. We recommend that students take it because some colleges do like to have the main score from the ACT and the SAT along with the additional essay score. So we recommend registering for it, but it doesn't automatically come when you register. You have to register for the test plus the essay. We recommend doing that, but they each have an optional essay that they end with. So at that level, pretty similar. When we get into the order and the timing of the exams, they do start to vary a little bit. You'll notice that the SAT begins with a reading section that's 65 minutes in length, and then goes to a writing, grammar section, 35 minutes, a math with no calculator, it's 25 minutes, another math, much longer, 55 minutes with calculator, and then ends with that essay. ACT begins with an English grammar, then goes to 1 hour-long math section, then a much shorter reading section, but it comes third, that's 35 minutes, and then a science section at the end, that's 35, and then that optional essay. So at this level, when you start thinking about preferences and impact on student test-taking experience, if you like to dive into a long reading section, and that's a great way for you to kind of attack the reading first when you're fresh, and you don't mind the length of a long reading section, well, the SAT is the exam for you. If you like a shorter one that's a bit more of a sprint, and you have stamina to get to it, in the third section, that could be a difference for students. Calculator. Some students do really enjoy relying on their calculator for computing, math problem solving and confirming their answers in the calculator. The SAT will deny you that for one of its sections. You'll have to solve it all without calculator. while the ACT allows you to use a calculator throughout. And then, of course, the biggest difference again, that science section, which comes fourth and final in the ACT in the 4 scored sections before the essay. If that is a preferred topic and students are comfortable with it, then dealing with it last is fine. If it's non-preferred, not only is it non-preferred, but it comes last when students may be experiencing more fatigue. So that might impact a student's test-taking experience. And I want to give you all this so that when sitting down and looking at test scores and looking at practice tests and thinking about, will you sit for, in addition to the SAT with the school district, will you maybe try an ACT? This can give you context on having supportive conversations with your children about those options. In the document that you can download on our website, there's a concordance table on page 11 that allows us to concord scores between an ACT on the 36-point scale, 36 being the highest, and the SAT at the 1600. And if you did have a couple of practice tests that you wanted to concord together and say, hey, which one tends to feature my student better, you can use this concordance table to say, well, actually, apples to apples, it does look like this test favors you better and you tend to like it more too. Well, that's interesting. Maybe we'll focus a little bit more on that test. So concordance table is a very useful tool in helping make that decision. In terms of a section by section drill down as we move further into the funnel, there are some important differences I do want to highlight for you that can really affect how a student experiences the test. So that SAT, we said, has a longer reading section. Yes, it does, 65 minutes versus ACT's 35 minutes, you can see. But there's something really interesting there. For a passage with about 10 questions, which is how they're both constructed, both tests, you have on the ACT 8 minutes and 45 seconds per passage, whereas on the SAT, you have 13 minutes. If you're a slower reader that enjoys a deeper dive, you may benefit from that SAT extra time that you get per passage. You have to be a bit more of a sprinter for the ACT. You have to be able to read quickly, grasp main idea, feel comfortable with a quicker read. That's an interesting difference in student experience. It's something to take note of when you're talking to your children about and thinking about their history academically, that they tend to be maybe slower readers, more ponderous, they need their time, or they're pretty fast and efficient, get through their work. That could lean you towards one test or the other. Although you do have more time for the SAT reading, there is increased rigor. Here's an example of how they do this. On the left, we have a paired question type called command of evidence. They ask you a question, based on a fact from the passage, and then below, they ask you to find the evidence to support your answer. And they give you 4 different sections of text to choose from to see which one is the best evidence to support your answer to the prior question. On the ACT, if you look at the comparable question, they'll tell you the line numbers to go to and ask you a question about those line numbers. So you've got more time, on the SAT, which is a benefit, but you also have increased rigor. So that's something to think about too. In other words, the SAT is a touch harder, but you have more time for it. When it comes to the grammar, the ACT and the SAT, as I said, both have grammar sections. Although they may look different in construct, ACT has 75, SAT has 44 questions. They are identical questions. One would never choose between the SAT and the ACT based on the English versus the writing because they're identical. Here's an example. They give you a passage. They underline a portion of it. It's an editing test to see if there's a grammatical error in there. The first answer for both SAT and ACT is always no change. Leave it alone. It's fine as is. And then they give you 3 options for revision. And they test the same set of skills: sentence construction, run-ons, fragments, misplaced modifiers, proper punctuation, commas, semicolons, apostrophes, etc. So if you need a little review of grammar, you're going to have to do that for both tests. One is not harder than the other. They're pretty much identical. When it comes to the math, however, there are differences, and these could be deciding differences for you in preferring one test to another, depending on the student. As we said before, you have those 2 math sections, 25 minutes, no calculator, 55 minutes calculator. So you have 80 minutes of total math for 58 questions. Over on the ACT, you have 60 minutes for 60 questions. So once again, SAT proves to be that slower test. You have more time per question. However, there can be some elevated rigor with the SAT. So once again, we're seeing with SAT, you have more time, but slightly harder material. How is that the case in math? Well, here's an example of an ACT math section. You have multiple choice, and you can use your calculator for everything. They go in order of increasing difficulty. They also do on the SAT, go in order of increasing difficulty. However, you have a section where you can't use your calculator. See that icon that has the slash of the calculator? Cannot use it. So you have to grind out your algebra a little bit more. SAT also has something called student-produced responses, or grid-ins, that look like this. Notice, I have to answer this question, and I have no multiple choice to look at. There's a good number of these on the test on the SAT as well, where I have to grade in my answer. If my answer is 2/3, I have to bubble into /3. And I can't look at any multiple choice to confirm my answer and give me any more confidence as to what is correct or incorrect. And then the greatest structural difference between the two exams is that science section. The ACT has one, the SAT does not. And what is this science section? Well, it's a test. It's not like school science exactly, where they're testing you on content knowledge. What's the definition of mitosis versus meiosis? It's more data presentations and reading experimental results. So here's a data presentation on an experiment. Here's tables, graphs, and charts. Can you answer specific data questions based on the information presented to you? It could be in physics, chemistry, biology, or science. So if you're comfortable reading statistical presentations, data presentations, and reasoning with science and reading, this is a favorable section for you. If this makes your eyes cross and your brain hurt, then it would be a non-preferred section. But this is what the ACT science looks like, and it always ends the test. Neither test has a mandatory essay, as we said before. They're both optional. We think it's a good idea to register for it just in case a college you apply to one day likes to see that score. Both tests are evidence-based reasoning tests when it comes to all the categories, but certainly the essay. The essays are persuasive, evidence-based essays. So what do they look like? On the ACT, they'll give you a scenario. In this case, it has something to do with intelligent machines. Artificial intelligence, is it good or bad? Then they provide 3 perspectives, different perspectives on the topic, and you have to respond in 40 minutes with your own perspective, your own thesis, and then discuss the perspectives given. A 5-paragraph traditional essay that students get trained on in school suffices for this: introduction, body paragraphs, conclusion. For the SAT, they give you a passage by an author, short passage, and they ask you to analyze it, analyze the author's evidence, the author's reasoning, and the author's style. This is a lot like a lot of writing students do in school: passage analysis, text analysis. Once again, a 5-paragraph essay suffices: introductory paragraph with thesis, body paragraphs, conclusion. So with that in mind, we're not going to dive into this. Maybe in the Q&A, some questions will come up, but I do want you as a family to think and to have discussions with your children based on this comparison and contrast. Is there a test that you prefer, and why? You may want to prepare most certainly for the state mandated SAT that the district is taking, but you may also want to pop in and try an ACT as well if you think some of those aspects of the ACT are favorable. If not, you concentrate on the SAT. But I wanted to equip you tonight with some context for that, and a resource that you can go to and have some meaningful discussions with your children about. In the resource, I do have some great case studies that allow you to kind of think through, hey, this test worked better for this type of student that had this kind of academic background. And so that's some interesting section of the resource to read, Personalized Pathways of Learning. And there's even a little decision-making guide for scoring which test you might like better that you can use as a family. I do want to spend a few more minutes, and then we'll go over to Q&A. I'll move through this rather quickly, but I want to leave you on a positive note about the learning opportunity, what I call transferable skills, that we believe a student can learn through the test preparation, test taking process. And I know it's easy to get cynical, and there are a lot of valid reasons to be cynical, be critical of standardized tests. And I don't deny those. However, as an organization, we do try to focus on the learning opportunity. And is there something at stake here that is more valuable? And students, when they do approach these tests cynically, do tend to not engage as much, do not tend to grow as much, frankly. So we do really value mindset and trying to set a positive mindset about what students can stand to learn. And what we call this is they can develop transferable skills through preparing for standardized tests. And I'll give you a couple examples of this. You know, there's over the years, been doing this for more than 20 years, I often hear, you know, I'm a good student in the classroom and my child's effective in school, but has some trouble on the tests. And there's a reason for this. It's not, we don't really believe in such a thing as a bad test taker, especially a student who's having success in the classroom. They can have success on the test. Why is that a student may not? A couple reasons. One, these tests are summative. They test 7th through 11th grade material. So you could forget things. You could forget what mean, median, and mode means because you studied that in a statistics course in 8th grade. You could forget a geometry formula because right now you're taking calculus or pre-calc and you took geometry a year or two ago. All that does not mean you're bad at math. So that math score, if it comes in a little bit low, might just mean that you forgot some stuff. The second thing, which I'll show just a little bit of, is that the tests are very good at presenting items, as Dr. McGill was mentioning, in increasingly rigorous ways. When you train a student to apply skills on increasingly rigorous material, they learn to transfer their skills to unfamiliar problems flexibly. They become more flexible, resilient problem solvers, which is what we want from our students. And there's a little anecdote that helps illustrate the value of this. It comes from some research on the science and art of teaching for transfer. And the anecdote comes from a physics classroom where a physics professor taught students during the course of the semester the following problem. A ball weighing 3 kilograms is dropped from the top of a 100-meter tower. How many seconds does it take to reach the ground? There's a formula for this based on the effect of gravity on a falling object. It's a standard physics formula. And teacher taught it, thought the students mastered it, then gave them the next problem on the final exam. Instead of a tower, 100-meter tower, it's a 100-meter hole in the ground. Ball weighs the same, 3 kilograms. Same question, how long does it take to reach the bottom? In much to the teacher's dismay, at the end of the test, students came up and said, hey, that's not fair. We never had any hole problems. And so the teacher was kind of struck by that and said, gosh, they got distracted by the tower hole thing, but they didn't see the underlying concept. And what that's called in educational literature is a failure to transfer a skill from a familiar setting to an unfamiliar setting, from the tower to the hole. And you see this a lot when students say, wow, I went in the test and it didn't look like stuff I studied, so I panicked, kind of freaked out. I'm a horrible test taker because I don't, when things change a little bit from what I did for my homework, it's really hard for me. That's just a student that's learning to be more flexible. It needs some coaching on mastering a skill and being able to apply it in multiple ways. And I just want to, before we go over to Q&A, give you a little bit of an example of this. I won't go, if we had more time, I'd actually make you take the quiz. Students often love it when they see their parents struggle on a quiz. I won't make you take it. But what I'm going to show you next, and I'll just show it for English, though I have some math items too, is we took 3 English items from an ACT English test, and a test that was given to thousands and thousands of students. And we aggregated the data on performance on these 3 items. These 3 items were very much related, testing really the same skill, but at 3 different levels of rigor. And it was very interesting to see how students performed. So this first item is a very common item on either the ACT or SAT, a test sentence construction, run-on sentences. It holds the world's record for the underwater dash, comma. It's probably as wary of your unfamiliar size, shape, and smell as you are of its speed. They're talking about barracudas. This is a comma splice run-on. I'm a nerdy English teacher by training, so this gives me chills when I see it. You see it, it's very common in student writing. It's a run-on sentence, specifically a comma splice run-on. J fixes it using a comma plus a coordinating conjunction. Of the testing population that took this, 60% of them got it right, picking J. Within the same test, same testing population, we go to the next item. Though engineering projects have shrunk the plat and have drastically reduced the crane's habitat, comma, each year they return messengers of spring in a land just emerging from a bitter winter. So here it's the same. If you classify this item on the test, it would fit under sentence construction as well. It's connecting 2 clauses, trying to avoid run-ons or fragments, sentence fragments, same skill area. In this case, however, the sentence is a little bit longer. They tucked back in the beginning of it the subordinating conjunction though, which is easy to forget when you first read it, which makes the first clause dependent, the second one independent, so the comma is fine. But they throw a semicolon in here. They throw in G, the answer. They throw a period in, they throw a comma and an and. That might get confusing to students. Maybe they're not comfortable with the semicolon. But if they do know sentence construction, they know that you can't use a semicolon, a period, or a comma and an and because they separate two complete sentences, and these are not two complete sentences, so the answer must be F. Same students, same test, the accuracy drops to 24%. Why is that significant? Well, what the test is doing is taking a same skill and just dressing it up with a little bit more rigor, and we drop from 60% to 24%. What that's telling us is that the students need to be able to master that skill just a little bit deeper to be able to apply it to slightly more rigorous items. Not that they're bad at English. They're probably editing their papers pretty well in school, 60%, getting it. But as soon as the test, which is very good at this, presents it in a slightly novel, unfamiliar way, comprehension breaks down. Then we get to the toughest one of all. Oh gosh, 4 lines long. There's a dash in there. There's a colon versus a semicolon. And I won't necessarily read this one through and go through it at length, but let me tell you, it's testing sentence construction, proper use of colons, all fits under the same category, the skill. If you have complete mastery of sentence construction, you know colons too, and the test is going to test them. And this student population that was 60% on the easier item drops to 17%, which essentially is worse than random guessing, which should be 25%. Same population, same test. What is this to say? They do it in math very, very well as well, but I won't take time on those items. When sometimes you get scores back, PSAT scores come back and you say, gosh, it's dispiriting. It's lower than, I'm getting good grades in class. It's a little bit lower. Don't panic. It could just mean that 2 things. One, you have to review some stuff you forgot, and you've got to get a little more used to seeing how they present these items in the test, because they're very good, like hard problems are in life, and looking a little bit unfamiliar, looking a little bit harder than what you're used to. And that's what good preparation can do. Now, as a result, if you can handle more rigorous curriculum, you can be more confident, you can be more resilient. There's research that Dr. McGill shared with me at collegeresults.org that shows that more rigorous curriculum and programming and students pushing themselves to take a more rigorous curriculum is better correlated with better graduation rates. So there's all sorts of benefits. And in life, what do we want our students to grow up for in college and career? We'd like them to be resilient, flexible problem solvers. So that's what's at stake. If you can take a positive mindset, not just see the test as obstacles or negative things cynically, but perhaps by preparing, my student can review some skills they forgot that are important for success on the test and in the classroom, and also maybe learn to be more flexible, successful with harder problems. And that's good for college and career. I had an opportunity to write a piece in August on the value of rigor of standardized tests and the rigor that they promote and how it can promote higher student achievement in inside higher ed. Happy to share that after the session if you'd like to read it. In the end, it can be overwhelming. Tests can be scary, PSATs, ACTs, all these different dates, so much to manage, so much to calendar in, so much to try to interpret when it's not something you're thinking about every day as a family. But how can we take a healthy approach? I think the most important way to do this is you've got an amazing district and community where the leaders, the instructional leadership in your schools are there for you. Your expert college counseling team is there to answer questions. Number one, focus on academic success in the classroom. It's more influential in college admissions than standardized testing scores. If necessary, supplement with test prep, personalize your analysis of practice test scores. You can use the document that I was sharing to think through. Sometimes students want a little bit of one-on-one instruction. We are working with the district to offer classroom course instruction, which we'll talk about in a minute. So you may need some supplementing, and that doesn't mean that the student is not good or not smart or anything. It just means, like I said, you may need to be remembering some things forgotten or get familiar with some unfamiliar content. Just a quick note on academic approach. I founded it in 2001 after doing my doctoral work in English at Columbia in New York City. And I taught in the core curriculum there while tutoring high school students for the ACT and SAT. And that's when it hit me over 20 years ago that the skills you need to be successful in college are actually being assessed and anticipated on these tests. If you master the skills as a high school student, you will be successful both on and beyond the tests. And we do believe tests for standardized students are not, so we want to take a sensitive approach to thinking about each individual student and really focus on skills and the opportunities beyond the test as well. In our partnership with the district, we do have classes forthcoming, a schedule that's been released. Dr. McGill can talk about where to access any of that information if you're curious about the scheduling and how to get involved. And with that, we have some promotional work we're doing too. If you want to learn more about what we're trying to make available to families, we're happy to talk to you. You can be reached at academicapproach.com. And that resource was at academicapproach.com/online learning resources. All right.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That's really informative. As we kind of dive into now our Q&A section, I just want to remind everyone that if you have a question, please type it in the chat and we'll make sure we get to it. Our first question comes from a student and it relates to another one, so I'm going to combine them. The student asks, do most colleges prefer the SAT over the ACT? And then another participant asks, they say, do schools accept the ACT, SAT interchangeably? 30 years ago, the ACT or SAT seemed more regional, with certain schools preferring one over the other.
Yeah, and this is, you know, as I said, I will always defer when it comes to more college counseling based questions to your excellent college counseling team. We do not do college counseling. We're expert in the tests. However, it is safe to say on this one that, you know, I remember when I was a 17-year-old rolling out of bed on a Saturday morning to take the SAT outside of in Boston, in Massachusetts. I only knew the SAT. In those days, many thousands of years ago, it was a regional exam. It is no longer the case. You can get into any college or university in the country. If they want a standardized testing score, they accept either the SAT or ACT. No more regional bias. Although those tests did grow up regionally, the SAT was created on the East Coast and the ACT and Iowa-based test for the Midwest. It has regional history. There's no more regional bias in the admissions process. That went away a long, long time ago. So whatever suits you best, whatever features you better, that's going to get you looked at anywhere.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing to add that I don't know if everyone's aware of, but many are, I'm sure, is that schools are offering in Illinois now the SAT. Years ago, they offered the ACT, and now they're offering the SAT every year to juniors with the essay. And so if you're wondering what the default is, it is the SAT for Illinois now. Yeah. Our next question is, what are your thoughts on some colleges and universities' recent decision to no longer require SAT or ACT scores for admission? Now, I know this happened, this was pre-pandemic. There was already a trend going in this direction. And I think the pandemic and COVID-19 has accelerated that for many colleges and institutions. What are your thoughts on that, if you have any at all?
Absolutely. There's a great website, if you're not familiar with it already, called fairtest.org. And it's a not-for-profit run by a gentleman named Bob Schaefer, who I enjoyed having a couple of healthy debates with some years ago about the role of standardized testing, because as you can hear, I feel that there's positive educational value in it. And fairtest.org is committed to a test optional movement that they've been supporting for years. On that website, you'll see a growing list of schools that are test optional. And so to Dr. McGill's point, that has been a movement that's been going on for a long time. For the class of 2021, the current seniors who have not had all fair opportunities to sit down in safe testing environments and test, almost all schools have gone for this class that's applying in current seniors test optional, in that, hey, if a student hasn't had a chance to get into a test center because they've been closed, and for those of you who are have had experiences with the class of 2021, that poor class has suffered an awful lot in trying to get reliable testing experience. The district has been great in making these available, but has not been the case in all districts. And so they've had to waive the requirement in fairness in order to be equitable, because it would be punitive to certain students that just not have the opportunity, access to take a test. So for this class, pretty much all schools are test optional. What many, and it differs from school to school if you look at their websites, many have said, we'll take this policy on for this class for this year, but we'll go back to wanting to see the tests if you can get them to us for in subsequent years. For class of 2022, what we're seeing is that a number of schools are saying, sure, we'd like to see them again as test centers become safe and open and more available, we're presuming, over the course of, junior spring for current juniors and into senior fall, and over summer and fall. So it's the, in short, the movement's been, few answers, the movement's been going on for a long time. It is, definitely led by critics of the test that think that they are, not fair. That's fairtest.org. You can read more about it, and you can see the growing list of schools. And then it is a question of equity this year to make sure that it's fair for students to get access to, really for all schools, for class 2021 to go test optional. However, third and final point, for current, juniors, class 2022, if you can get in and take a test, and we're presuming that there's going to be these opportunities, districts making them available, it can be an advantage, and a lot of schools are going to be looking for it again once we come out of the current testing, pandemic climate.
Yeah, that's a great response. I think I'll speak from the selfish district side, is that it's still a graduation requirement from Illinois. And so you may remember we had the class of 2021, which was supposed to take in the spring, didn't. And so they then took it in September, which was good because they had the opportunity to use that for their college applications if they wanted to. And I would just encourage students and families to have conversations with your counselor, because to the extent that you want to use that score may depend on your score and if it is advantageous to you or not. If you're a poor test taker, but you have really, really good grades, you may want to be strategic about that. But every university and college is a little bit different on that. One more question for you, Matthew, and then we have a couple more that populate that I'm going to try to read while you're answering this one.
Sure.
There's different perceptions out there about the importance of the test in college admissions. Can you speak a little bit to, I think there's a report that's done annually. What is it that admissions officers are looking at, and where does the test fall in line with that?
Great question. So there's a report that's put out annually from NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors. And it's actually, I have a snapshot from it in the document that you can download at academicapproach.com online learning resources. And what it shows is a nice little bar graph that shows what are the most influential factors, in college admissions officers' decision making. And it kind of ranks them comparatively. And you see that your grades, and I mentioned this earlier, your grades in the classroom, GPA, the rigor of your coursework, your performance in the classroom it outweighs significantly the standardized tests. So first and foremost, and if you think about it from a data standpoint, the standardized test it can be a meaningful summative snapshot of your performance on 3 hours on a Saturday. However, your GPA is summative of multiple years of academic performance, day in and day out, year in and year out, through freshman, sophomore, junior year, and into the first semester of senior year. That's more data for a school to make a decision about in terms of your performance. So of course your GPA is going to outweigh your standardized testing score. So for example, over the years I have met students that have maybe not applied themselves quite as assiduously as they should have in the classroom. So their GPA doesn't reflect their best potential. But they're really quick and quite gifted, and they do very well on the tests. That's not always great, right? Because it says maybe the student was underperforming in the classroom. That doesn't bode very well. Yeah. On the inverse, if you have a great GPA, your teachers are saying you're a curious student, go to office hours, ask questions, really good constructive member of the academic community, and your scores are not quite as competitive, that's a better, more favorable scenario, because it shows that you are consistently an excellent student, and that's who you're going to be on campus at that college, that university, if they admit you. So long story short, the standardized tests are not as important as your performance in the classroom. Having said that, I'll go back to the original points that I made. I think it can be a virtuous circle. You can get better as a student in the classroom through thoughtful test preparation, and those academic skills, if you apply yourself seriously in the classroom, will also be reflected in higher test scores on the test as well.
That's great. Thank you. One more question for you, Matthew, and then we're going to kick it off. I'm going to kick it over to Gilda to introduce Jeff. We have students, a couple students on right now that want your advice. They've signed up for the SAT prep course, and obviously they're going to attend the sessions, every single session. Don't miss a session. But what is your advice to them if they want to maximize those sessions to increase their score? What advice would you give? Do you have any tips or pointers?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously 100% attendance, as you suggested, be engaged in questioning the instructors. Instructors are there. They're going to have access to our entire curriculum, which the course won't cover, but they can do more lessons outside. They can kind of overachieve outside of what is covered within the coursework as well, and take extra practice tests with us too, if they'd like to.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matthew. Gilda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, Matt. So great. Always nice to see you both. And Jeff, so nice to see you again. Thank you so much for stopping in this very busy day that you've had.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So everyone knows I've introduced you, but I realize that there's so much more to the introduction. My goodness, you write for The Atlantic. You are a professor advisor at Arizona State for Innovation. You've written those 3 best-selling books, and it's wonderful you can spend time with us. Thank you so much. So we know you're coming back in October, and you'll be.
I'm really excited to be doing that.
Me too. And then you'll be able to have a chance to talk to a whole new group of people, but to the people that we have tonight, those juniors who really won't necessarily be coming back. Tell us about what we need to know. Some takeaways, please.
Yeah. So I think you've been talking a lot about testing tonight, and I think that we have to really put test scores in context, right? It's one of many factors that schools consider in holistic admissions. But I really feel, after spending a year inside college admissions for my new book, where I was embedded in college admissions offices. Now, I was only embedded in 3, but it's a big public in University of Washington, a small liberal arts in Davidson, and a big private university in Emory. And the year I was there, all 3 were still using test scores. Now, obviously, because of COVID, they're all test optional this year. But one thing I really realized is that applicants, and especially parents and students, they really place a far more weight on the test than admissions officers do. I mean, really, admissions officers in a holistic way are really trying to attempt to measure the qualities that aren't quantifiable often, and are usually gleaned from an applicant's, extracurricular activities, their essays, their recommendations, and things like that. And so I know that parents and students out there, to them, the test score is a quantifiable number, right? It's something that is comparable whether you're in Illinois or Florida or California. 1,500 on the SAT is the same there as it is in Florida, as is in California, where an A isn't, and high schools aren't created equal, extracurricular activities aren't created equal. But what I saw when I was reporting the book is that admissions officers look first at the high school curriculum and at the high school grades. That's really kind of if we're thinking of everybody on the starting line at the same place when their application arrives at a university, it's the high school grades and curriculum that get you, partway to the finish line, if you're thinking of it as a race. It is really the thing that they lean into the most, right? They're looking, are you taking essentially the most difficult curriculum you can, and are you getting the best grades in them? Then they're going to look at the test score. Sometimes the test score tells them something they already know, right? So 60% of students, for example, on the SAT have scores that correlate with their high school grades. They have high grades, they have high test scores. But sometimes the test score will tell them something else. They'll give them another signal. Maybe there's a grade that doesn't make sense, and the test score gives them that signal. Or they don't know the high school very well, and they're a little worried about the rigor of the curriculum. So that's where the test score really comes in. It's if you place it in priority order for most colleges and universities, it's number 3 after high school grades and high school curriculum. And so I always want to tell people that that is really important to place the context and the weight of testing there as you think about what's next.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Matt and Patrick, if you've got a question, I've got some questions. If you want to, feel free. Okay. So, you know, in looking at your book, I noticed that you'd mentioned that admissions people spend 8 to 12 minutes on an application. Is that right?
Yes. So don't get too frustrated by it, because I know every student out there thinks they're spending 8 to 10 hours probably. And now they're going to be evaluated in 8 to 10 minutes. You have to remember, you know, at a place like, so let's take Emory, for example. The year I was there, they got 30,000 applicants. 4 years earlier, they got 20,000 applicants. Nobody added any more days between January and March when they were reading regular decision, right? So they have to read ever faster. That is really an implication of this. Now, parents out there and students are saying, oh my God, how am I ever going to get in then, right? And I think the big piece of advice, another big takeaway, Gilda, from the book is that admissions at a college or university is really about the college or university. It is not about the applicant. In any given year, colleges and universities have a list of priorities that they have to fulfill. They might want more students from the Dakotas. They might want more humanities majors. They might want more men, because men are, believe it or not, underrepresented in higher education. They might want more first generation students. They might want more African American students, whatever it might be. It might also be more narrow. Like I saw this often, where the coach of a team needed a position player, or the orchestra needed a piccolo player, or the debate team needed a debater. So the important thing I think to remember for those on tonight is that just because a college has a 25% acceptance rate doesn't mean you have a 1 in 4 chance of getting in. You might have a 90% chance of getting in if you fulfill what they need, or you might have a 0% chance of getting in. Now, parents and students will always say, okay, how do I know what their priorities are? It's hard to guess, right? And so my feeling is if you have a balanced list, meaning if you're applying to 8 or 10 schools, and some of them are a reach school where, you know, you're academically, maybe you're a little bit below what their average is. And there's a group of schools that are your foundation schools in the middle that you're kind of right in that sweet spot. And then there's schools that, you know, you're kind of above the average. If you have those and you're putting those on the list because you really do like them, not because some counselor told you to or some parent told you to, you're going to be fine in this process. You're going to have a lot less anxiety. The students that I found in reporting the book who were least happy with how things turned out is they got their sights set on 1 or 2 schools, maybe. In 1 or 2 schools, they weren't even quite sure why they wanted to go there, except somebody told them it was a good school, or it was in certain ranking or something like that, or their friend went there or whatever. And they got their heart set on that. And then they filled out the rest of their list because somebody told them they had to. And what ended up happening was they didn't get accepted to a lot of those schools, those quote unquote schools that they really liked. And they ended up disappointed and much more anxiety ridden than they should have been. So if you have a balanced list academically, socially, and financially is important. This process is going to be fair. It's going to be not easy, but it's going to be pretty, it's going to be a lot less angst ridden than I think you're hearing from a lot of students.
Is there a number of schools that you recommend students look at? Some number that you like and you suggest?
I'm always a big fan of like 9 or 10 because, you know, you could have 3 that are a little bit of a stretch, 3 that are kind of in your sweet spot, 3 that are, you know, that you're sure of. They're, you know, almost sure bets. Maybe throw in another for, you know, kind of something that you always wanted to try out. You never know. But the thing is, make sure that you love if you put them in priority order, make sure you love number 1 as much. You can love them for different reasons, but make sure you love number 10 as much as you love number 1. Because again, that's where I saw students, they get so hyper focused on 1 or 2 schools because it was where they wanted to go forever. And that is where the disappointment really ends up.
There's a question that came in from a very frustrated parent, and I know you've talked to so many about early decision and their frustration about how can we choose when our child can't even get on campus. Is this going away? What suggestions do you have?
Well, I am, if you read the book, I'm not a big fan of early decision because I think that it really takes away a lot of high school from students, right? Because you really have to move up your entire college search essentially into your junior year because you have to apply so early in your senior year. And I think it really cuts short. The other thing that early decision does is it turns college admissions into much more of a strategic thinking or strategic priority rather than where you really want to go. So many students, and this may be happening, well, I want to apply early decision because I think it's easier to get in. I just don't know where I'm going to apply. I'm going to look at the numbers and try to figure it out. Early decision was really designed for kids who really knew where they wanted to go, students who really knew where they want to go, and parents who didn't have to compare financial aid offers. Because remember, if you get accepted early decision, it's a binding commitment, and you're not going to get to compare financial aid offers later in the spring from multiple institutions, which is something really important to remember. Early decision is and especially now, and I saw this, a lot more students applied early decision to selective schools this year, meaning for this year's seniors, because they were test optional, and students said, why not apply to Harvard, right? They're test optional.
Yeah.
So that made early decision even more of a lottery this year than in most years. If you're unsure of early, don't apply. Don't apply just because you think I have a better shot of getting into a selective college. You want to be sure of that place. It's interesting, when I talk to admissions deans about their retention rates later on, many admissions deans tell me that they sometimes, if they're going to lose students, they sometimes lose those early decision students as sophomores because they feel like they made the wrong choice. Again, if you're sure, do it. But if you're not, wait till regular decision.
Okay, we've got 3 more questions and then we'll let you go. What's the story you want to tell? What does that mean?
I think that part of the problem with applying to 8 or 10 schools, especially nowadays where you do it all online and you have a massive Google Docs with different essays, is that unlike when I applied to college and I had to literally type out an application, you're not thinking of that institution. Right. So what ends up happening, I saw this so often, is students have their essays in a big Google Doc and they're cutting and pasting, and they're just essentially saying similar things for Emory as they're saying for Boston College, as they're saying for Notre Dame, as they're saying for Davidson. All those places are very different. So I think of, as you're doing these applications, I understand you have to probably complete 8 or 10 in a single time, in a short amount of time, but think of them as single applications. What's the story that you want Emory to know about you? What's the story that you want Davidson to know about you? Yes, maybe 80% of it's going to be the same, but Davidson's different than Emory. One's a liberal arts college, outside of a major metropolitan area. One's in the middle of a city, right? What is the story you want them to know? Remember, going back to your question, you have 8 or 10 minutes. If you had 8 or 10 minutes in an elevator with an admissions officer, what do you want them to know about you? Remember, they're not detectives. If you don't tell them something, they're not going to know it. So what do you want them to know? What is the essay tell that maybe the high school transcript doesn't tell? What the recommendation doesn't tell? You also want all of these pieces to fit together. So think of your application as a package that tells this story of you in 8 to 10 minutes.
Beautiful. So my last question for you: how can we better control the process? What do you mean?
Well, we need to not let it overwhelm us. It is one of many transition points in life. It is a scene setter for the rest of your life, but it's not the only thing that happens in your life, right? It is not a make or break decision, as I point out in the book. All these students, I follow dozens of students through their college process. Many of them have dreams of going to Ivy League schools or top name schools. Some of them got there, some of them didn't. But you want to know what? They didn't end up not going anywhere. They didn't end up going to a college nobody ever heard of. They ended up going to some pretty good places. Yes, it wasn't their first choice, but it wasn't not a choice at all, right? They still had choices in the end. And I think that's important, is to put that into perspective. In one way, this comes from a friend of mine, Rick Clark, who's the Dean of Admissions at Georgia Tech. And he highly recommends don't let this overwhelm your family either, right? Don't talk about it every waking hour of every day. His advice is set aside maybe an hour once a week after dinner on Sunday night, for example, to talk about college as a family. Yes, maybe at some times of the year during application season or decision season, you're going to have to ramp that up a little bit, but don't make it, we're going to talk about this every day, at every dinner, at every family gathering. Enjoy high school, because high school only comes around once.
Exactly. I remember as a former guidance counselor, we would tell people, when you're in the grocery store, of course, now that doesn't always happen as frequently, but, when you get those questions over the grapefruit, I'm going to college, maybe, just leave it right there. The other thing that you remind me of, I remember this was 15 years ago. There's a Students for Students Club, and we always take a look at, we ask the students every year, what are the issues that we need to focus on this year? And it was, substance abuse would come up, but then 15 years ago, anxiety came up for the very first time. It was 15 years ago and now it's really exponentially, your heart breaks for these kids. So I love your suggestion about the Sunday night. Also, you say, don't use college as a trophy for successful parenting. This is a great and important book. I love the way you recommended the book Colleges That Changed Lives as another resource for people to look at. And it's going to be another great night when we welcome you back to the Glenbard Parents Series.
I can't wait to be there in person.
Really, really appreciate it. Patrick, anything you want to add, Matt, before we say goodnight to everybody?
Oh, this is great. Thank you for always organizing great events, Gilda. It's really a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gilda.
Thank you both. We're going to put up the slide. Probably someone that Jeff, is coming to us next month. We're going to be, next is Phyllis Fagel, who's going to be talking about her book, Middle School Matters. Then rail safety is a real concern for our community. John Duffy will be talking about his book, Parenting in the New Age of Anxiety. And then starting the month of February, we have Ron Lieber, who will be back with us again with his new book, The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make, on the 4th. And then please join us when we welcome Tara Westover with her book, that's our community read, Educated. So it's a very full lineup for the next 2 months. So share it. We welcome you all back. We welcome you. Peace in the new year, all of you. Thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe.